Welcome to One Version of the Truth. This is a show about how leaders make decisions in complex environments and how data, analytics, and AI can create measurable business value when they are tied to the right problems. Today, I'm joined by Kyle Winterbottom, CEO and founder of Orbition Group. Kyle has become one of the most recognizable voices in the data and AI ecosystem, especially as it pertains to delivering business value and data leadership. Through his work with boards, executives, and senior data leaders, he has had a front row seat to how organizations think about talent, strategy, and value creation. When Kyle and I first spoke in 2023, we talked about how data leaders could deliver measurable value from their data strategy. Since then, AI has pulled CEOs and boards much closer to the conversation. And that raises a bigger question. If companies are investing heavily in data and AI, why is so much of that investment still failing to translate into enterprise value? In this episode, Kyle and I talk about why the AI value gap starts in the boardroom, why many data leaders are set up to fail before they even begin, and why the future may belong to the less technical specialists and more to the commercially minded leaders who know how to use data and AI to improve business performance. This is One Version of the Truth with Kyle Winterbottom. Let's get into it. So today we're here with Kyle Winterbottom. He's one of the probably hotter influencers on LinkedIn right now, speaking the business value and the office of data and where data leaders can drive business value within their organization. You know, Kyle, for those of you, the people who don't know you, could you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what Orbition does? Sorry.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, first of all, Taylor, thank you for having me on your show. Secondly, I don't think anybody's ever described me as an influencer before, so there's a first time for everything. But yeah, my name's Kyle Winterbottom. I'm the CEO and founder of Orbition Group. Really simple in terms of what we do. Effectively, we're an executive search firm that operates exclusively right slap bang in the middle of the data analytics and AI ecosystem. So data analytics, AI, and leadership search mandates is primarily what we deliver as a business. Primarily, there are two layers to that. So we do a lot of work with boards to help them to kind of shape and identify the CDO mandate and who they need to hire for that role. And then obviously the layer beneath that is usually the senior leadership team of the CDO. So that is, heads, directors, Ps of the different kind of data vertical disciplines. So it could be data governance, data architecture, data engineering, yada, 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 across that value stream. And then there are a couple, of auxiliary services that wrap around that kind of talent and search ecosystem. So a lot of kind of market and talent intelligence. And then we do quite a lot in the advisory space, which is more related to kind of skills, if you want to call it that. So probably more akin to what people would recognize as HR consulting, which is more effectively in the realms of kind of competency frameworks, skill matrices, career paths, learning pathways, skills assessments, and all of that type of stuff, and usually helping businesses to build their own infrastructure in that space to deliver those things.
Cool. Well, first and foremost, some people may know us, and you and I often go back and forth on LinkedIn, and both of us have pretty strong opinions on data and data leadership and where it's headed. But before we jump into any of that, tell me a little bit about your story. How did you get into why data? Like, what did you wake up one morning and say, hey, I'm going to start one of the most listened to podcasts around data leadership? Was that like a aspiration from young childhood, or?
Well, there's two things that are for sure in life I'm pretty certain of, Taylor. And one is nobody kind of wakes up wanting to work in executive search, right? And I think the same is true for working in data. So I've I've double barreled that quite well. But I guess my background, many people probably don't know this. I got a degree at university in journalism. Very quickly found out that without a lot of work experience, you're not going to get employed. It's funny, I was actually only having this conversation recently, but when I came out of university was right in the midst of the kind of the financial crisis. And at the time, I didn't really put two and two together. It's only now I look back at the timing and think, well, no wonder I couldn't get hired. So I then went over to the States on a scholarship. I got an MBA. I played for 2 years in exchange for an MBA. And then I worked in sales for a little bit. And then, as most people do in the kind of executive search industry, fell into it. I think I was very fortunate that at that time, we're going back quite a long time now, so kind of 15, 16 years ago. And obviously when you join a business, they put you into a certain industry kind of vertical, right? And at the time, I was probably very fortunate to be put in what was then labeled as business intelligence, right? And it's kind of just progressed from there. So I've practically spent my whole career in this space. I've been fortunate to travel. So lived in the Middle East, in Dubai. Obviously,
Cool.
I've played soccer in the US and then came back to the UK. And then I went back out to the US, lived in New York for a couple of years. And obviously, we've got a fairly big presence out in the States. So our business is, headquartered in the UK, but we're primarily UK and US, probably 60-40 split in terms of, the work that we deliver across those two countries, really.
It's cool. I didn't know you were you in MLS or were
No,
you?
no, 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 no. Just on a soccer scholarship. So yeah, it was a
Yeah.
small D2 school. Really, the driver for me was to go out and get a degree that could actually get me a job after trying once and evidently failing. So yeah, no, it was, but it was good experience.
So it's almost like you built the foundation in executive recruiting and with a specialty in business intelligence, and then your passion for journalism and meeting people kind of blossomed from that. Is that a?
Yeah, well, I think obviously the way that I say we as a collective for Ambition, but obviously my approach and style is probably quite different to most executive search firms in terms of how they operate. We are 100% very much more marketing, brand, content led. And obviously the wraparound of that then has become this kind of huge collective community where we do a ton of events and, there's an executive mentorship program that we do. You can probably see a magazine over my shoulder. So I think that the journalism degree that I ever thought would become useful has probably become useful more day to day in terms of my rants on LinkedIn, really.
It's good. Well, what I love is did you ever anticipate getting as far as you've gotten in social media when you were first starting this venture? Did you ever think you'd have tens of thousands of followers, be cited and quoted by data executives around the world? Is that just like a whoa kind of?
Yeah, it's wild, to be honest. Definitely wasn't intentional. I get asked about this about the podcast all the time. The
Yeah.
podcast for me was really a tool for us to learn really what's going on, because obviously, as most people know, there's only a small pool of people that are very active in kind of sharing their thoughts and opinions on platforms like LinkedIn, right? So the podcast for me was how do you get the people that aren't into a medium by which they can share those thoughts. And it's been a huge learning kind of experience for me personally to understand, what's going on inside different businesses and what the challenges and the opportunities are of the industry and so on and so forth, really. And I think all of that, like anything with that stuff, the more you do and the more consistent you are with it, it just snowballs. So the podcast wasn't designed to be listened to in 180 plus countries around the world for sure. The posts were never really designed to attract followers of any kind. It was more just kind of, here's what I'm seeing. I hope this is of value and let's exchange thoughts, and I guess, yeah, the more you do it, the more confident you become at doing it. The more you are not afraid of sharing what you see and what your opinions are, I guess. And that then also snowballs, right? Because the more opinionated you are, usually the more people engage with you to either agree or disagree. So, yeah, I guess that's what the platforms like this are built for, right?
Yeah, it's been fantastic to watch. And it's funny. I mean, I feel inspired by some of the work that you're doing. It's actually what led me to start this podcast. And it's kind of fun because I started probably my first real podcast was with you in 2023, where you were interviewing me. And now I think it's fun because I get to turn the table a little bit. And when we first spoke, I was saying, I think something along the lines that, so I have a CEO mentor that I work with quite a bit. And I was talking to them and they always saw business value as a nice to have. Like it was never like the tip of the spear. If anything, they wanted clarity. So we spent a lot of time talking about ROI, IRR, enterprise value. What's changed since we first spoke in 2023?
Yeah, I think it was an interesting conversation because I think if you fast forward to today, I think the views and opinions of most boardrooms are maybe a little bit more pointed now than they maybe were back then. I think a lot of businesses and, CEOs, founders, etc., definitely invested into data as a capability. And I think a lot of the perception around it at the time was, let's bring these people in to build a team that can develop the capability that we need to use data more effectively. And yes, we want insights, and yes, yada, yada, yada. And I think, as with anything, there's probably a bit of a shelf life to how long the business is willing to keep investing in those things without them being able to put kind of a, pinpoint to some kind of tangible benefit or return. And I think over the last couple of years, we've seen the screw really be turned in the industry, for a lot of businesses that just haven't unfortunately seen that. So yes, they might have clarity, yes, they might have the capability to move data around their business and use data more effectively than they did 5 years ago, but that doesn't always translate to the fact that the right type of action is happening that, improves the performance of their business or increases shareholder value, as an example, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I think it's that bit that's probably got a little bit more pointed, to the point now where businesses are kind of like, well, that's great, we've done a lot of investment, like the time for talking is now done, and the time for results is now, basically. So yeah,
We're seeing the same thing in AI too. I was at a conference at MIT earlier this year, and one of the guy who runs Peter Thiel's family office put out a controversial statement, and he said basically, hey guys, this is the year to prove that AI is valuable. And then other people were chiming in that AI is going to be 10 times bigger than the internet bubble, given the amount of money that's going into it. So there's going to be a lot of losses, which is normal for big investment because there will be some big winners too. But one of the things that I kind of wonder about myself is data a sunk cost for organizations? Is it just an acceptable expense, or does there need to be ROI? I think at my work, one of the things that I always run into is the business never wants to be accountable for a benefit. So the data team absorbs the cost and no one will advocate for the benefit. So it looks like the data team is incompetent, but at the same time, they don't get the partnership from their stakeholders or executive leadership. I mean, where's the balance in all this?
It's really tough, and I find myself having this conversation on a daily basis. I think data over the years has often been compared to marketing, right? Where there's always this comparison of, well, marketing doesn't always prove ROI, or marketing has a lot of investment and doesn't always generate a return.
That's right.
And I think the point that I've always tried to make is that is by and large probably true. However, what marketing has tended to do over the years is kind of have one big win that pays for itself and then all of the failed projects. And I don't think necessarily that data has ever gotten to that level, right? You look at other functions, HR, finance, even IT, they're often considered to be a cost of doing business, right? Rightly or wrongly. Data isn't that still. I think data is still seen as a nice to have. And then when you don't see the benefit from it, nice to haves unfortunately don't last, right? To your point about kind of, advocating for the benefit, I mean, I think you're absolutely on the nose with that, because it's the same thing we see, right? If you look at most CDO search mandates, again, even now today, they are still very much designed around to come and build the capability, build the foundations, all of those usual buzzwords that you hear. And then when you start to dig into, okay, well, what are you expecting from this person? The kind of the people in the boardroom will start to regurgitate the job description to you. Well, we want them to build a platform. We want them to build a governance framework. And I'm going, okay, so they will do that. They will do what you ask. They will deliver exactly what you asked for. And then what? Because at that point, still nothing is going to have changed, right? So, and to your point, then there's an accountability gap, because obviously the people in the business either don't want to or aren't being asked to be accountable for using data more effectively to improve the business performance of the units that they run and operate, right? So a lot of work and a lot of activity, but no one owns the result or the potential benefit of kind of what the work is supposed to deliver. And fundamentally for me, I think that is still arguably the biggest challenge in the industry, and therefore I think what tends to happen is, if you look at some of the CDOs that have delivered a lot of value and can pinpoint a tangible benefit that has, especially in commercial settings, kind of generated, bottom line impact, as an example, they've kind of taken it upon themselves. They've gone, right, okay, well, it's my job then in this situation to go and influence the people within the business to make decisions or change decisions or, something in that remit. So that therefore the work that we're doing does become of value to the organization, does hold a benefit. But again, it takes a certain type of person with certain type of experience and a certain type of skill set to not only be able to do it, but to be willing to do it in the first place, right? And I think that's the big thing. And for one reason or other, most don't want to, or probably just don't have the experience to fall back on of kind of changing it. Hear me on platforms like LinkedIn talk so much about, kind of commerciality and kind of influencing skills and none of the hard data related skills, because really at that level, that if you want to generate an ROI, whether we agree with that sentiment or not, that's the part of the job that you have to be really good at. So,
Yeah, it was eye-opening for me because I was head of data or a data leader, 10 years ago in my career. And I went out and I went to the marketplace and I bought the best tools. I hired the best consultants. I brought in really smart people and they brought all these ideas and frameworks and I went to go apply them and people just kind of laughed at me. And I think that there's all this like tall talk in the space that it's like, oh, if you have a data mesh or if you have a governance framework or if you have this tool, all your problems go away. And I'm not a data person or a technical person by trade. I just ended up in this role because I opened my big fat mouth and I said, it can't be that hard. And that's how life teaches you. Um, and what I kind of took from it is like, none of this shit works. Like none of it works. So I just said, you know what? I'm just going to start talking to people and be like, what do you want? Okay, I don't get it. Help me understand. I will yell and scream for you. And that customer mindset is so hard to shift people to. And like you're an entrepreneur, so like you get it, because if you're not customer focused, you're going to end up broke. And it's the end, but you still stay employed if you're not customer focused as a data person. You can hide behind risk. You can hide behind, oh, someone needs to administer this. You can hide behind tribal knowledge. But like, what kind of career is that? Like, you're sitting there taking the glory of, hey, we're advocating for this new technology. But at the end of the day, you're sitting there hiding behind a data warehouse. It's like, I always kind of joke around about like the data strategy. It's like, it's almost like watching Wile E. Coyote try to catch Bugs Bunny. It's like, we're going to put our data in a big box, right? And then we're going to put something on top of it that pulls our data out. But the joke is all of it's going to be wrong and no one's going to want to use that. But that's the data's problem. And I just like sit here and I just like watch this play out in organization after organization. And then to your point about like this remit where people come in and they're like, hey, we need to build a new data strategy or the last one failed. You know what that results in? A second data warehouse. And then all of a sudden you have parallel architectures costing 8 figures and everyone's like, well, no one wants to use it. And then the data leader's sitting there being like, well, data quality and semantic layer. And it's like, guys, someone needs to put clarity into this. Someone needs to give direction. There needs to be better executive leadership on this. And then executive leaders aren't always that data savvy, like, or AI savvy for that matter. So like, there's this presumption that executive leadership is making the decision, but they're really just punting it to the data leader. I mean, at what point? Because I think a big part of leadership is who you are. Like it can definitely be learned, but like you have to have the disposition to want to work with people and solve their problems and do it with a little bit of service and self-sacrifice. And that doesn't play well to people who don't want to do that or have a little bit of an ego, right? But how do you get this generation? Because it's our generation, but our generation of data leaders to make this massive pivot to executive leadership before they realize that, like, hey, if I'm going to become this person, why not just become a CEO? Like, why bother with this data and AI and become the whipping boy in my organization? Like, how do you coach people to make that leap? I mean,
it's really difficult. And to your point, I think, you're right. Most people that sit around a boardroom are, they're probably not data savvy enough to really understand the complexities of kind of what they're asking. And to be honest with you, then, if you even strip it back a little bit further than that, when I go into conversations, really the driving force behind why most organizations will hire a CDO is that it's as broad as there must be some value in here. Like they know that they have all of this data, that is just sat around the business, and they know if they got the right, that they kind of concocted that in the right direction and leveraged it properly, that it could do something for them as it relates to the performance of their business. But what that looks like in reality, they have absolutely no idea, right? So to your point, they then punt that off to the CDO. But again, this is where, in my opinion, there is a gap, because the mandate is still very much determined by the building of the capability. And I think, look, people sometimes get my, I guess, my views on this slightly mixed up. I'm not against technology at all, and I'm not against data at all, but we've proven time and time and time again that those things are not the issue. We've improved data quality tenfold across probably every organization on the planet, right? We've built the best data platforms and architectures. We've built the best governance frameworks, and yet still nothing has changed, right? So I think that we're at a moment in time now, and we've seen a lot of these people, like the persona of the CDO or the executive data leader, has started to suffer because of it, because a lot of the roles are starting to be cut or the scope reduced or whatever the case may be. So this is very much a moment in time where we need to kind of collectively have a look at this thing, right? That fundamentally the skill set needs to change, because yes, the technology and yes, the data component of the job are very important. Like you can't execute without those things, of course, but they are table stakes.
100% they're table stakes.
They're
And I
table
think,
stakes.
yeah, I'm gonna come with a strong opinion here is that I think the coming and going of the CDO is done like that. But I want to tell you is that at the same time, data leadership, and I think we share this viewpoint, is more important than ever. I think technology savvy business leadership, whether it comes to AI, data, whatever, is so in demand. That is the future. Like I think the notion of career progression being like, well, I'm gonna, run BI, become the director of governance, run architecture, now be the CDO. Forget about that. Just say, hey, I'm really, really good at deploying AI enabled analytical solutions in the business. And guess what? I'm a domain expert in finance, in healthcare, right? That person is going to go to the stratosphere in success. And I think what we're looking at is the gap is leadership, right? It's not technical capabilities. And whether that's aspiring CDOs that want to be more impactful, maybe it's time to consider like, hey, look, stop pushing dashboards on the business, try to figure out where you can build, business applications with LLMs, sit with your partners, go grab coffee with business stakeholders, go build those relationships, go. I feel like that's the future and I think an executive leader, it would be receptive to that. Like when I talk to my client, most of my clients are executives. They're not data leaders. Data leaders consistently rebuff me is I don't need your help. I'm doing great. And it's like, well, the statistics would show otherwise. And I understand that you don't need help, but it's absolutely wild to me. So like if I go to an executive leader and say, hey, just take the most ambitious person in your business that's, 20 to 30 years old and they really just want to have an impact, let them loose, right? And that person is going to radically shape their career by pursuing this. So like, how do we cultivate leadership amongst these aspiring data professionals, probably in, millennials and below, how do we speak to them?
You know what, Taylor? I think this is almost the $1 million question, right? Because for me, if you flip, not necessarily flip the skill set, but if you got people to focus on the part of the job that they either don't want to do or feel that they don't have the skills to do, or, they're just not interested in it, everything else is kind of downstream from that, right? I think, I think it's easy for us to sit here and say, it's on the data leader to go and fix this. By the way, just for clarity, it absolutely is like it's the job, right? It is the
Yeah.
job. So if you can't do it,
It's the
you need to figure
unspoken
out.
job. It is an unspoken
Yeah,
contract.
yeah. You've got to figure out, you've got to go and figure that out, right? And kind of get help and do whatever you need to do. And obviously some people are great at that in terms of, look, I'm self-aware enough to know that there are skill gaps here, and, there's programs out there, whether it's kind of professional coaching or whatever it is, like they go and try to do things that help them in certain kind of regard. But I do think that we are at a point where almost I am unsure as to, have we gone too far? Are we too down the track on the things that, maybe at the time felt like they were the right career paths to pursue, but in hindsight, sitting here now, we can kind of say, well, maybe that's been a waste of 10 years, right? And it's probably paid very well and so on and so forth. But if you still look at where the gap is between what data was expected to do as a function for a business and what it's delivered, that gap is still pretty wide. However, most, in my opinion, is most organizations and the way that they hired around specifically for data skills and to build data teams, especially at the leadership level, they've kind of created this skills gap because, 99.9% of them, even today, a lot of them still hire for technical skill sets first because they still believe, it's almost in the mind of a lot of executives. And obviously you speak to executives as I do, but there's still this kind of underlying feeling that, well, data is it's a technical discipline, right? It's kind of something that needs to be fixed. It's a technical problem to be fixed. It's not an asset that we can leverage for performance. And there's still that kind of notion that sits around it, which then fundamentally leads into how they think about it. And then that leads into how they hire for it. And as I've said a gazillion times on LinkedIn, like, what did we expect to happen if somebody is more employable because they can, write Python code as opposed to generate revenue or reduce cost or improve churn or whatever, blah, 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 blah for a business? Then what did we think was going to happen? Like, we've incentivized certain behaviors to the point now where they're kind of ingrained in us, and the skills gap now is very wide, in my opinion. And trying to kind of climb back up the mountain after you've just abseiled off it is a tough thing to do for many of them. It's not impossible by any stretch. And as I said, there's a lot of people out there that are kind of trying to, plug some of those skills gaps. But yeah, I think fundamentally we've focused so much on the technicalities of data and the infrastructure and the governance and the quality and so on and so forth. And as you'd expect me to say, I have this conversation on a daily basis, right? Like, I've interviewed literally hundreds of thousands of CDOs or data executives, and I'm having a conversation with them, and the amount of prodding and poking to get to talking about, well, what's the benefit of all of this work? You look at most resumes, they describe the work that they've done. Okay, well, what was the benefit of that work? The benefit was X, Y, and Z. Okay, well, that's an output. Improving data quality, yeah, great.
Yeah.
But if you ask the CEO, is improving data quality a business benefit? They'll probably laugh at you.
Yeah.
So,
Oh,
it's the next step, and then the step after that is quantifying that benefit, right? And so there's a whole thing there it's very much, commerciality on one side of the coin. On the other side of that very same coin is the ability to go and talk in a commercial business facing setting to kind of, people that care about certain things and not get dragged into the technical jargon and describing the work around platforms and models and all of this type of stuff, So I think we've realized, maybe too late, unfortunately, but the skill set that we thought was important actually that's just the bottom of the table, right? Like, that's just table stakes. Like, yes, you need to know data, and yes, you need to know technologies and blah, 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 blah. But the bit that actually moves the needle is all the bit further up the value chain. And we've just neglected that for so long that I am worried that, I don't think that upskilling is possible at the scale we probably need it to be.
Which is a very, very scary point. And I just want to share with something. What I think is interesting is you're doing the Lord's work up front with, hey, let's get the right person in the door so they get successful. Don't get me wrong. Once they get in the door, it's still improbable to be successful. I'm usually dealing with people who are failing towards the end, right? I'm working with data leaders who are struggling. And the best data product manager I know, the best, so value oriented, all the things that you would expect. He said to me the other day, he goes, Taylor, I think my job is facing obsolescence. And so here's the caution to earlier data professionals. Don't listen to what's on the resume, because that's going to set you up for a career that's going to become obsolete in a time of AI, right? If you are an ambitious young professional, you need to build those skills, but don't make that your job. And you're a talent guy. So like data is a skill. It's not a career, and it's a very valuable skill. So is AI, right? I think people mixing up those two get into trouble. If you want to be a CTO, awesome. CIO, that's going to be around for a while, right? Because just the nature that capital budgets get allocated for innovation to your CIO, CTO, that's going to go on for as long as technology is technology, right? So if that's your ambition, wonderful. I actually spent a lot of time coaching data leaders to become CIOs or CTOs, not CDOs, because there's a more rich career path for them in a variety of different reasons, and to bolster up other skills like security and stuff like that. But I think one thing that drew me to data, right, is And you got your MBA. So they talk about things like internal consultants or intrapreneurs, for lack of a better word. That's what people need to be in the role, right? And that takes a certain type of person to want to go in there, selflessly solve a problem for someone else and deliver a capability that helps make their day-to-day, 1% better. How do we get executives to start asking better questions so that they're like, hey, you don't want a data person. You know what you want? You want someone who isn't afraid to ruffle some feathers, isn't afraid to do the right thing. They just need your air cover when people go complain about, because they're going to piss a lot of people off along the way. So are you willing to put your reputation on the line to make that person successful? There's tons of people like that inside organizations, whether it's for, mergers and acquisitions or technology related change. How do you foster those connections with executives early on so you don't end up with this disconnect between data leaders and executive sponsors?
Well, honestly, this is kind of where I live. Like this conversation is literally where I live, almost on a daily, weekly basis. And I think that part of it is very much trying to get them to think differently about kind of why they're making this investment in the first place. Because as I've said a couple of times now, most of them go, yeah, there must be some value in this data. I tell you what, we need a CDO. They'll come and tell us what to do. And what does a CDO do? Well, a CDO will probably oversee. We'll probably need a platform, and we'll definitely need to improve data quality. And so very much straight away, you get sucked straight to tactical kind of delivery stuff. And I think a lot of the conversations that I have, I'm trying to get them to zoom out, right out. And then you can start to piece this back together. And the end result is, you thought that you needed somebody that come from an engineering background, or, we get this all the time. We want a CDO, but we want a CDO that's got comes from a data science background. Like, and 9 times out of 10, they can't answer it, right? Because it's like, I don't know, someone at a big strategy house has told them that that's the cool thing to do, or whatever the case may be, right? There's a lot of this stuff. There's so many kind of external factors that create kind of these biases that come up, in these conversations. So as an example, some of these conversations that we have are, start right at the very top. Tell me what your top 3 priorities are as a CEO for the next 18 to 24 months. What I always find hilarious at this point, when you have this conversation with data leaders, you get into a conversation like, well, there is no business strategy, or the business strategy is not clear. Like, spoiler alert, I've never asked a CEO of a business what their goals or objectives are over any period of time and them not be able to tell me. So all it really tells me is they've not written it down somewhere for you to read, right? You're just not asking the right questions.
The amount of data leaders who I've worked with who've gone to the CEO or executive sponsor and told them they're wrong about their strategy, I'm just like, are you crazy? Like, are you crazy? Like, this is the captain of the ship telling you to go in a direction and you're saying no. And then not only that, are you saying no, but your objection is for something intangible. It's like hello, social skills, like like right or wrong, they're in charge of the organization. Like that blows my mind. It's like, okay, Mr. or Mrs. CEO, what do you want? Profitable growth. Great. That's what our strategy is going to be. Everything we do at Data is profitable growth. The end.
That is exactly it, right? Like, there is, like, you can count on less than one hand what these people are going to say, because by and large, it's all the same thing. It's either, as you say, profitable growth, or it's, EBIT improvement, or it's an increase in revenue or sales. It's, bottom line improvement. It's cost reduction, it's operational efficiency, it's risk mitigation, it's usually, improving churn, improving margin. It's something that's always around that. And then from there, the next set of questions we normally ask is, okay, well, how do you measure how successful you're going to be against those goals? And again, they can always tell you, well, it's primarily these KPIs or these metrics. Okay, and who in the business, and the next layer is who in the business makes decisions that are most influential against those metrics. And again, they can pretty much always answer that question. So therefore, then you get to a point where you go, okay, right, you thought that you needed, like, for some weird reason, like data science skills and, advanced analytics skills and NL skills and all of this type of stuff, when actually what you need is somebody that's got of using data to drive performance against metrics that are going to improve margin or churn or EBIT or whatever. Now, that immediately opens up the talent pool, right? Because you're no longer talking about data governance or data quality or data architecture. Yes, this person, to a certain extent, will need to have enough knowledge and understanding that there's things that need to be done behind them for data work to be able to go and improve those metrics, right, in terms of how the decisions are made and how they improve that stuff. But they don't need to be the person doing that. Do you know what I mean? So
I
often what you find is how businesses hire is they go and get someone really technical to sit in the top seat who
yep.
are obviously really good at the technicalities and they can direct technically very well. But the bit that I've just mentioned to you and kind of, as the example at the start, that stuff is never done from the outset. So, there's a lot of stuff built and a lot of capability built and foundations delivered and blah, 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 blah. But it's never in a direction of alignment with anything that anyone in the business cares about.
Yeah, it's I think kind of what we're getting at is that business leaders can be data leaders and they can come in and close that gap. And I was talking to a senior exec who's a friend of mine, and she called me up and she's like, "What do you think about our data strategy?" And I go, "Just make sure it's oriented." And she's like, "Well, what about all the data stuff?" I go, "Don't pay attention to that. That's just gonna sidetrack you. That like that." It's great. It's theoretical. It's wonderful. But really, what the best thing you can do for your organization is just give them a clear problem statement, and then you can make it about data. You can make it about AI, but just say, here are the constraints. This is what we need, and then everything's going to be made within those constraints. And they were worried like they needed to know SQL or Python or stuff like none of that stuff matters. And the other thing, we've talked about SQL and Python quite a bit. Well, guess what? With generative AI, anyone can become a SQL expert or a Python expert overnight. So those skills are getting commoditized. And in fact, people are able to do things with SQL and Python without even realizing they're using SQL and Python. Don't get me wrong, the accuracy isn't where it needs to be, and things are going to improve over time. But you don't think that's going to improve over time and rapidly for that matter. The difference between AI agents' coding ability in the past 6 months is radically different. So if you're still thinking about this as a multi-year thing, this is going to be a rapid change. And you're a sports guy. So you like soccer. If the ball's sitting in the middle of the field and no one's going after the ball, that's kind of where we're at right now. Who's going to go get the ball and score the goal? And the opportunity for that person is enormous. And I just do not know why we're all standing around talking about it, not just like, hey, I've got an idea. This is the use case. This is going to deliver. I got the business on board. Let's just get this done. Slam dunk. No, it's going to be hard, but we got it. The world is so hungry for that leadership right now. Why is everyone hesitating?
Yeah, well, I think this is the thing, right? There's definitely a conversation to be had there about willingness to begin with and obviously comfort. That for many people that have come up through a traditional data or technology track into data, which let's be honest, that's where the majority of people that now sit at the kind of leadership level across the data analytics ecosystem, that's the path that they've followed, right? Again, back to my comment before, because that's they are the type of people and the personas and skill sets that businesses have hired into those roles. So for them then to be having a very commercial conversation kind of goes against everything that they probably stand for, right? Because that's just not their skill set. They've never had that experience. It's not their background, et cetera, et cetera. I've said this publicly, got a lot of scrutiny for it. And there's definitely an argument to say yes, that even at the board level, they need to be more technical or, have more technical savviness around it. That is definitely a thing. However, to our point here, if someone put a gun to my head and said, look, you've got one chance to make the right decision. Are you hiring a technical data leader or are you hiring a commercial data, a commercial person that just happens to know enough about data to deliver something of benefit to a business? And every time I'm choosing the business person.
Me too. Every time.
Because it's just an alignment thing like that. And we talked about the accountability gap earlier of, if the CDO's not given the mandate to be accountable for the benefit and the outcomes, but the business unit leaders who make the decisions aren't accountable for them either, then nobody's accountable for them. And therefore we can't be surprised when nothing happens, right? It's the same with the alignment piece up front. Somebody has got to own that. And I think the problem of the very zoomed out version of this problem is, as I said before, CEO looks at this and think there's got to be opportunity in here somewhere. Let's hire a CDO. They'll tell us what skills does a CDO have. What do we need to advertise? Well, I say this publicly. CDO doesn't even need a job description, but doesn't need an advert. It'd be 2 sentences really. So what then's written in an advert is usually a load of bump just to fill it out so it doesn't look pathetic. It's you need to have all of these skills. Well, no, you don't. You need to figure out what the business cares about, the decisions they make around those goals and objectives, and then what work you need to do to to improve the decisions that ultimately improves the performance. Like that is that alignment bit up front that almost never happens. And don't get me wrong, that's not to say that if you do the alignment bit that everything else is easy, because we all know that that's not the case. You've still got to be able to go and get these people on side and build relationships and build trust and take people for cake and coffee and probably bribe them and whatever else you need to do, right? But he's got to our point earlier, it's got to be pointed at the right thing to begin with. And it still baffles me that organizations are investing multi-millions, sometimes billions into all of this work that isn't really pointed at anything. And then they look shocked and surprised when they don't get anything from it. And it's like, well, you were never going to get anything from that because it wasn't set up to get anything from. Like, you've built a capability. Now, you've now got the capability. Now you need to use it, So and I think most people do it the wrong way around, right? They build the capability and then think, okay, now we've spent a load of money and realize we've not got anything from it. Now we need to start looking for opportunity. But again, you've got to have the right people with the right skill set and the right, I guess, nous to kind of pull all of that together for you.
We were talking about this before I started recording, and one of the greatest ironies to me starting my business, and I started my business so data leaders never had to feel kind of the pain that I felt when I was running data. And I've sold to data leaders, and time, and I think I said this earlier, I get rebuffed with, I'm already doing this. I don't need help here. What would other people think of me if I asked for help externally to solve the problem I was hired to do? Now, after a while, I realized I'm like, okay, I can't help them directly, but then I'll go to the executive and I'll be like, how's your data leader going? They're like, well, they don't listen to me. And it's always an argument about something I don't understand. I don't understand how the work's connected to business value. So one of the biggest things I've done with my own business to help data leaders is when we're going through a sales cycle, I qualify the executive to where, what's your problem? What are the roles and responsibility? Who's owning this? And that just gets settled out first. Otherwise, I end up with a customer that doesn't want to work with me, or it falls apart because no one knows who's on first, and it's easy to blame the third party. And it's just been eye-opening to me. And something I wish data leaders did better is ask for help. They have such a hard problem. They have such improbable odds of being successful. They have so many people attacking them indirectly, usually behind closed doors and behind their back, so it's indefensible. And all they're trying to do is the right thing for their business. So one of the things that, in this time, right, maybe it's too late, maybe it's not, but we're also in a transitional moment, right, where AI has taken more focus than potentially data. So things maybe have slowed, maybe the data team's getting bypassed. So maybe there's time, maybe there's headspace, maybe there's opportunity to reflect. Do you think this is the right time to ask for help, or is it just the right time to make some hard decisions and change the trajectory of your career?
Well, there's never a bad time to ask for help, right? And the next best time, if it wasn't yesterday, it's today. And if it's not today, it's tomorrow. Like, it's as simple as that, really, isn't it? I do think, you talked about AI there. And I do think what AI has definitely done is shone the spotlight quite firmly back on data. If you think about some of the less sexy components of the data value chain, things like data governance and data management, all of a sudden they're getting their time again a little bit, right? There's quite a lot of investment going into there because
Sure.
Obviously there's a lot of businesses now that, they kind of looked at it and thought, I don't really get that. I don't, whatever, and now all of a sudden it's, this is the thing that underpins how good our AI will be, right? Fine. Okay. Let's throw a lot of money at it. So I do think there is a moment in time here where, like, the opportunity is there. It's probably as strong as it's ever been, since its inception, since all of the hype and the excitement around, using data as an asset and all of those buzzwords that kind of we kind of frame. I do think now is the moment. But yeah, I think it's almost imperative, right, that these people go and find help really wherever they can get it. And I think, just understanding if there's skill gaps, go and plug them. Like, it's hard to give a definitive answer on this stuff, but I do understand why some of them are reluctant, because the optics can matter inside an organization.
100%.
For sure. But equally, we know how the story plays out. So it's kind of like, well, what are you more bothered about? The perception of what people might think of you because you've got a mentor, or you've asked for help, or you've brought in some external support, or whatever the case may be, or getting fired in 12 months. What's the biggest pain there? Do you know what I mean? And I think it's yeah, people just need to make a decision around that. And the other thing to note here, you talked about the kind of the conversations that I had. There's a massive opportunity in interviews. I tell people this all the time. Like, an interview is a two-way street.
Right.
If if you're interviewing with a board member, which if you're interviewing for the type of roles that we're talking about, you absolutely will be. Like, there's so many questions that you can ask in those interviews across, a number of different people that tells you, like, are all these people on the same page? Are they all talking about the same thing? Can they all frame the problem in the same way? Are they all talking about what the goals of the business are in the same way? Are they all identifying together type of thing under the skin of that? And again, like, often the problem is most of the people that they're talking to, they're being hired against a mandate, which is delivery of some kind of data technical thing, and therefore that's the job that they look at it and go, yeah, I can do that job, not a problem, right? So they come in, do the job, and then get fired for doing the thing that they've been asked to do, right? So it's a tough conversation. I think what you see, if we go back to the point I made earlier about the conversation that I have with CEOs to try and get them to zoom out and look at this purely from like a business standpoint, it becomes really obvious to see the companies that have got to that point, right? Because when they hire, they rarely talk about skills or kind of technology. They're often framing the problem around value levers. So as an example, there's all, the usual stuff that you need to be a kind of a good CDO, right? Or whatever the title is, but it'll be framed very clearly. So usually they'll want to go and get somebody that's got experience in a particular domain or with a particular subset of a domain. So it might be like, we want somebody that's got really good exposure delivering machine learning solutions into pricing optimization, as an example, because they know that's the value lever. That's where we win. That's where we get competitive advantage. So having someone that's done that, that's a big plus, right? The more generic the job description is, probably tells you that they don't really know and haven't thought about it.
It really just comes down to starting on the right foot. It's what is that alignment? What is that charter? What is that goal? And being clear and not being afraid to push back and saying like, hey, I'm not here to deliver technology. I'm here to deliver change, and I need your air cover on that. And if you can't give me that air cover and the political conditions don't, I can't be successful. It's one of those things. Every once in a while, I'll get a knock on the door for a CDO job, and I'll say, no one can be successful in that role, including myself. And eventually they'll hire someone, and usually that person isn't successful. But that upfront agreement needs to be clear, and you need a very strong executive sponsor to be successful. And if you don't have that, it's treading water without a life vest.
The crazy thing is, Taylor, last thing on this, but you look at around the industry and there are many organizations now that are on their third, fourth, fifth iteration of CDO, practically with almost an identical mandate, right? And every
Yeah,
time they think it's the person, they think, oh, we've
it's
just
not
hired a
the
bad
person.
person. It's never the person.
Yeah.
Very rarely is it the person. Is that person was never going to be successful. They were never set up to be successful. They were always set up to fail based on what you were asking them to do, because fundamentally what you wanted them to deliver was never going to change anything as it relates to the performance of the business and the goals and objectives of the board. But you still see that cycle happening all the time where, someone gets fired, they bring somebody else in to do exactly the same job, almost exactly the same profile, same thing happens, and they wait 18 months, they have another go, try again, blah, blah, blah. A crazy old world.
It's interesting. We're in an interesting time where data and AI couldn't be more important. The data leader is in question, and there's no one stepping in to fill the void. I think the opportunity here is tremendous for ambitious data professionals to just jump in there, get their hands dirty, take a couple bullets along the way. But the opportunity, I think, is enormous. But I also think gravitating towards that CDO role might not be what success looks like in the future. But if you're a executive who delivers a data solution with business value for a finance organization and healthcare, you become a very compelling candidate for CFO or, a business unit president to run a brand or something like that if you continue to build upon those. So I always encourage data leaders to think bigger than the CDO, but to your point, not straying away from some of those principles that we've kind of gone over and over again on this call in terms of oriented to business value and working with their colleagues more effectively.
Yeah. And there's been many examples of kind of CDOs that have obviously done very well and then gone on to getting bigger roles outside of the data remit, COO role, or we work with a client, a very large organization here in the UK, where their CDO has now been promoted into a CEO role of one of their sister brands, basically.
Awesome.
So, but again, if you look at that person and that business in particular, it's just steeped in everything they do with data is about commercial performance and how it helps the business to be better at what it does and get competitive advantage. Those things often live together, right? Good people who get better jobs because they're in an environment where they've, and probably had to foster that environment. Don't get me wrong, but the kind of the culture and the environment and the person are one, as it were.
I love it. I love it. Kyle, thank you so much for your time. If people want to get in touch with you personally or learn more about Abration, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
LinkedIn's probably the easiest way to get a hold of me. Unless the algorithm keeps trying to suppress me, which I'm starting to fear it might. But yeah, LinkedIn's the easiest way. If you want to look at anything that we do, orbitiongroup.com is the website, and loads of stuff on there all about our community and different media stuff that we do.
Well, I appreciate your time today. Thank you for everything that you do for the data community. It's always fun to listen to what you have to say about hiring the right talent at the right organization at the right time.
I appreciate you having me on the show, Taylor.
All right. Bye. That's it for this episode of One Version of the Truth. If you're interested in how leaders turn data into real outcomes, you can follow the show wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm Taylor Culver. Thanks again for listening.